Welcome back to another episode of Purposenomics. I'm your host, Paul Wilson Jr. I'm excited to be back here with you. Welcome back for those who have been tracking along with us on this podcast series, but also want to welcome all of our new viewers who may be experiencing this teaching series for the first time. And hopefully you're going to get a lot out of this and will actually want to go back and not only watch the previous episodes, but of course share this series and this link with somebody else. So let's jump in. I'm excited about today because what I'm going to be teaching on really helps to unpack Purposenomics a little bit more. For those of you who have been tracking with me a little bit, you know I released a new ebook back in August, Purposenomics, the quest for meaningful and profitable work. And one of the things I wanted to do in this is God continues to give me revelation and insight is kind of break that down and really almost simplify it in a way. I think it simplifies it, but it actually makes it even more profound than even as I was initially even writing the book. And so a lot of times, again, the struggle between purpose and profit, right? And one is more important than the other in some people's eyes, and other people, profit is more important than purpose and all of this. And so really, I want to use this teaching to really lock in on that we need both. And I'm going to give you a simple formula, and then we're going to unpack what it means. So purpose times profit equals prosperity. That's it. Purpose times profit equals prosperity. I'm going to read something that I wrote and going to dig into this more because I think this is essential, especially for those who are in ministry space, community space, social enterprise space, and really business in general. If you're a kingdom citizen, you need this principle working in your mind so that you don't have to feel like you're in conflict, right, with anything from that standpoint. And so when we look at Purposenomics, right, we have to understand that Purposenomics is really recognizing that when God-given purpose and responsible profit are aligned, the result is exponential prosperity. And this prosperity is holistic, encompassing spiritual growth, financial increase, relational health, and generational legacy. Are you frustrated with your work? If you answered yes, you're not alone. Statistics tell us that more than 70% of people are frustrated with their work, and many of those are looking to change jobs. So if that's you, why is that? I would suspect that one of the reasons is you're not fulfilled in the work that you do. You're not excited about it. You're not passionate about it. When you get up in the morning, you're not looking forward to doing the type of work. Or you're financially frustrated. Maybe you're good at what you do, but financially it is not providing what you need or what you're actually worth. And it's hard to find work that actually will do both. Fulfill you personally and from a purpose standpoint, but also support you financially at the level that you need to be supported and at the level really that you're worth. In Purposenomics, the quest for meaningful and profitable work, I unpack purpose-driven work, holistic growth, community and collaboration, and legacy principles. In these four areas, Purposenomics goes in depth to help you understand how to apply these principles to your career, to the work that you do every day, so you don't have to be frustrated, so you don't have to be angry, you don't have to be upset about, yes, I love my work, but I'm not getting paid enough, or I get paid a lot, but I hate what I do. Let's end all that, combine the two together where you can have meaningful work and profitable work together. So check out Purposenomics today if you're tired of being frustrated and you're ready to be fulfilled in the work that you've been called to do. And so the prosperity we're talking about is holistic, right? And it covers the things that I just mentioned. But I wanted today really kind of get into the purpose times profit perspective from this. Profit is a force multiplier of your purpose. And so what does force multiplier mean, right? Basically, it's a factor or a combination of factors that gives personnel or weapons or the hardware the ability to accomplish greater feats than without it. So this term initially had been used and is used from a military standpoint, and in particular in military science. So basically it says the combination of things, whether it be personnel or weapons, right, provides the ability to accomplish factors of greater feats than without it. So if you didn't have this force multiplier, if you will, these additional, let's say, resources, you can maybe accomplish X. But with the force multiplier, now you can accomplish 10x or 100x, right? So it's this multiplication factor that expands. that enlarges, that increases, right? That multiplies what you could have accomplished without those factors in place. And I think this is so applicable, so relevant to your business, to the thing that God has called you to do, to your ministry, to what you believe you're supposed to be offering the world through your purpose. If you don't have profit, your purpose is, I don't say nullified, but the impact is minimized. Can I say that? Right? Can we agree on that? Without profitability connected to your purpose, it's like purpose is your vehicle, but profits are the gas in the vehicle. So it could be the most beautiful looking vehicle in the world, right? And have the most incredible capabilities, but without gas or an engine that move that vehicle along, it won't accomplish the purpose for which it was designed or created. And I believe for many people right now in business, in ministry, in doing community work, and as a nonprofit, there's so much more you could be accomplishing that's in your heart, that you're passionate about, that you're driven by, but you won't get there because the finances are not in place to drive that purpose engine, if you will. And I get it. I understand, right? Because some people are eschew money, right? Because they don't think, well, it's that important. But trust me, money is critical. Money is significant. Money is vitally important. Even Jesus's ministry had to be fueled by money. There are specific people, in particular women and others, right, who actually funded Jesus's ministry while he was here on the earth. And again, this is the Son of God. This is the one who pulled money out of the fish's mouth, right? He told Peter to go get the fish so they could pay their taxes, right? And so even Jesus had real people, right, who helped to fund his ministry that allowed him and the disciples to do what they did. And so I want to give you a few other examples, right? So, I'm not just making this up, but I think, again, we're going to start with the Word of God, but also going to give you some practical examples of where this really fits and where purpose times profit equals prosperity is very relevant. So the first example I'm going to bring up is Joseph in Egypt. And you go read Genesis chapter 37 through 50. Again, I'm going to just give more of a summary overview of these, but see how they connected. So if I had to summarize this up, right, and talk about the purpose first, Joseph's God-given purpose was to preserve life through wisdom and leadership, right? Through his wisdom and leadership, he was able to preserve life. But what was the profit part of this? He managed Egypt's resource so effectively that the nation thrived even during the famine, right? So remember, he was in prison, had a dream. He interpreted that dream for Pharaoh. And what was it? That there will be 7 years of profit or prosperity and then 7 years of famine. So Joseph managed during that 7 years, once he was taken out of prison and elevated to a position, he managed the profitability of Egypt for 7 years such that when the famine came, he not only was able to take care of Egypt's needs, but all the other nations were coming and they had enough, right, to engage and help these other nations and other people, including his own family that came. And so if we talk about prosperity, ultimately his stewardship not only enriched Egypt, but also saved the surrounding nations, including his family. All right, so that's one example. Purpose times profit equals prosperity. So Joseph managing the profit well became the false multiplier of his purpose. Now let's talk about Boaz and Ruth. Now, oftentimes people fast forward to Boaz taking Ruth to be his wife. But I want to back up and really think about this and really break this down too. So let's look at Boaz first. So again, from the purpose standpoint, yes, he lived out his covenant responsibility through compassion, generosity, and faithfulness to God's law. But there are some very practical things that Boaz did too that allowed him to be profitable. So first of all, he was a wealthy man, right? And the fact that he was wealthy allowed him to take over and buy basically Naomi's property, right, that Ruth was connected to. And so Boaz was profitable. That even allowed him and his remember also his servants of all the harvest they were getting in to leave a little extra for Ruth to be able to have, right? And this is prior to them getting married. And so again, when we think about his profitability, he was in position to exercise his purpose, right, and multiply his purpose. And it became such a force multiplier, right, that their union produced between Boaz and Ruth, Obed, who was the grandfather of David, right, and part of Christ's lineage. So it was really prosperity that helped to fuel Boaz's purpose that blessed generations beyond them. So again, a lot of times we want to romanticize this story, but there were some very practical things about Boaz's life prior to meeting Ruth, right? And then in the process of connecting with Ruth, that his profitability allowed him to be in position to buy the property, buy the land, and be in position that now him and Ruth had the ability and opportunity to be able to interact. So I'm going to just give you one more, right? This is the parable of the talents. Of course, many people are familiar with this one, Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 30. So the purpose of the servants, they were entrusted to be good stewards for their master's mission. And that's the purposeful part. They were to be good stewards. But the profit part, once we get through the entire story, you got to go back and read it. I'm not going to retell it here, is the fact that the servants who were good stewards, the reward of them investing the money is that in doubling their talents, they got twice as much as they initially invested, right? That's profitability. That's the practical exercise of investing, then getting a harvest from that investment that ultimately they were given the label of you well done, good and faithful servant. So they entered their master's joy. So a prosperity that was not only financial, it was spiritual and relational, which also meant that we think about greater trust, new responsibilities, and even an eternal reward. But even think about this, because a lot of times we stop right there and say, oh, they were given twice as much. But guess what? They probably did. If they were good stewards over that first investment, now that it was doubled, more than likely those stewards would continue to invest, which means that money would continue to grow. So a lot of times we just kind of cut off the story right there and don't think beyond that. But practically speaking, they would have been expected to continue investing, not just stop at that one time. So their profitability would have continued to grow, which now their responsibility grows. Again, this is that force multiplier of their purpose. Okay, so I hope I'm making sense, because this, I believe, is critical for so many people who are running organizations and leading businesses, and they're doing it in the name of God. And somehow what is maybe creeped in for some, not all, but for some, is that being poor is piety somehow, right? Or that if I just get enough to scrape by and get to the next day or the next week or the next month, and I'm doing my purpose, then that's good enough. Well, but think about if you could just add 2 times more to your budget, how much more could you do? If you could add 10 times more to what your current budget is, how much more impact could you have? How many more families could you serve, right? How much more impact could you have in your community if you had 5 times more or 10 times more? So we have to really look at how do we be good stewards that positions us to allow our profitability to be a force multiplier for our purpose. And what I'm saying here is money can't replace your purpose. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do anything until you get more resources. But what it does mean, though, is that you need to be paying attention, and you need to be asking God for wisdom. You need to be seeking out different opportunities that allow you to generate more revenue, become good stewards so you can have more profit, which means I got more coming in and I got going out. And then that profit can be applied to my purpose, so my purpose can grow in capacity. It can expand. We can reach more. We can impact more, right? We can influence more from that standpoint. And so, again, I think this is a critical factor for many people who are probably struggling right now. Or your business may be struggling, or your ministry is struggling, or your nonprofit is struggling. And sometimes it's easy to allow that struggle to become the norm. It's easy to allow that struggle to become, oh, this is just how it's going to be and how it's got to be. And I'm just going to be satisfied with, trying to do more with little. And again, yes, let's not despise small beginnings, but also let's not settle for small beginnings if that's not God's best for us, right? I think we can agree on that. Every ministry isn't supposed to be small. Every business isn't supposed to stay small. Some stay small sometimes because of the mindset of the leader. Some stay small because of the mindset of those involved that either don't have a heart for stewardship, right? And maybe they aren't disciplined in that way, or they settled for less and accepted that as the only amount of resources that they could have or should have to execute their purpose. And I don't believe that's true for everyone, right? That doesn't mean that every ministry, every organization, every business is going to be $1 billion, $1 million business. No, I'm not saying that. However, for many of you, you're supposed to be bigger than you are right now, whatever bigger is. Many of you are supposed to have more capacity than you do have right now in terms of the capacity to serve, the capacity to reach, the capacity to have impact. And again, your profitability needs to be your force multiplier. So you need to be asking God for wisdom. How do I increase my profitability? How do I increase my revenues? How do I decrease my expenses? How do I grow my profits so I have more resources to impact more people? All right, so let's look at a couple of modern business examples. I gave you some biblical insight and foundation, and there's many more examples I could go through in the Word of God. Now, I'm going to save that for later, but if we're just talking about a modern example, for one is Tom's Shoes, and many people are familiar with this story, but they're one-for-one model, right? So the company uses about $10 to produce a pair of shoes and sells them at $40 to $140 in stores. So they get a pretty good profit margin, right, for those shoes. But here's what they also do in terms of investing back into the community. So far, and these numbers, I think even a couple of years old, right, the company has donated more than 35 million pairs of shoes in 70 countries. So basically, when you buy a pair of Tom's shoes, they give a pair of those shoes away. But guess what they would not be able to do if the profit margins weren't where they were. If their profit margins were only $10 per shoe, right, we're currently right now, depending on which shoes, $30 to over $100 per shoe. Now they have more resources to give away more shoes. If they were not profitable, I guarantee you, right, maybe not guarantee, but I would strongly believe that they would not give away shoes. And they've been able to give away 35 million pairs of shoes. So their profits are a force multiplier in terms of what they can invest back into the community based on shoes. Another example, very similar, is Warby Parker, glasses, buy a pair, give a pair. So as of 2023, they had given away more than 15 million pairs of glasses. Okay, now let's just think about the benefit or the impact of 15 million people getting a pair of glasses that they didn't have to pay for. How does their quality of life improve? How does the quality of their ability to learn improve? Their ability to work, their ability to serve their community, serve their own families, their ability and even their confidence in the things that they have to maneuver through in life with a pair of glasses that they wouldn't have had otherwise. Over 15 million people, right? Which means that's even over 15 million probably families that have been impacted, right? And just multiplying the number of people in those families. So the impact is much more than 15 million glasses, right? It may be 3 to 4 times as that if you think about all the people affected in that family by just one person getting a pair of glasses, let alone potentially if it was more than one. Their profitability is a force multiplier, right? That's connected to the purpose or one of the purposes that they have, right, for their business and probably for their nonprofit foundation. And I'm gonna give you one more example on a practical level that just helps us think about this. So this is happened back in 2019. So billionaire Robert F. Smith paid off the student debt for the entire Morehouse College graduating class, a gift estimated to be around $40 million. And then I read something else that said a couple of years later, he also paid off the student loan debt of their caretakers, which I think was another $30 to $35 million. It's almost maybe $70 to $75 million of debt that's paid off. Now, as much of a burden as debt is, especially to college students, right, entering the workforce, coming out of college, to have that debt wiped away, how much more impactful can their own lives be in terms of not only making money, saving money, investing money, managing their money without having that student loan debt hanging over their heads? So yes, this was a $70 to $75 million gift from Robert Smith, but the impact is so much greater than that 75 million, right? Maybe 4 to 5 or 10 times greater. We'll maybe know in a few years, hopefully maybe somebody will do some research on that. But think about that, the profitability. So he's a billionaire, he's an investor and has other businesses. The profitability from his businesses, he was able to take some of that profit, right? Maybe up to $70 million of profit, pay off debts. And so now all of these college students and their families aren't saddled by that. So how much more impactful can their lives be financially without having to start off their careers paying off debt and moving forward? And so hopefully you understand what I'm saying is that money doesn't solve every problem, right? Money doesn't fix everything. However, when you align a purpose-driven person, a purpose-driven project, a purpose-driven organization, company, business, nonprofit with the ability to generate profits, right? And the ability to apply those profits to that purpose, I believe if we look at it clearly and are honest, a profit-producing, purpose-driven business can have more impact than a purpose-driven business that is not producing any profit or is barely scraping by or is barely getting by, right? So what we're talking about, money doesn't give the purpose, but it fuels it. Money doesn't provide the purpose, but it gives it greater capacity and impact from that standpoint. So let me just share and just kind of wrap this up with just a couple of thoughts. Again, the purpose has to be foundational and not incidental. So that's where everything has to start. What has God given you to do? What is the vision? What is the mission? What is the package, if you will, that he's given you to unwrap for the world? The giftings, the talents, the abilities, right? All that stuff. That's the foundational piece. That's where it starts. And that's the DNA really of your organization is that purpose. But then number two, profit becomes the fuel, not the end. So profit is not the purpose of the business. It is not the end all and be all. It's the means to get to the end. So we don't treat profit as the sole goal. Profit is harnessed to reach the mission. So we don't treat profit as the sole goal. Profit is harnessed to expand the mission reach. So we're talking about expanding capacity, expanding impact, creating greater results and outcomes from that purpose being accomplished. So number three is impact scale. So we're talking about the scalability of impact, right? Through the reinvestment and leveraging market mechanism, profit enables multiplying effects. More people served, more capacity built, and more systemic change. And then number four, sustainability over dependency. And if I could wrap it up here too, so many organizations become overly dependent on outside resources versus being able to generate their own revenues and create their own profitability, that many get at risk of literally going out of business when those resources are cut off. Now, again, every organization is different and the size of those organizations are different. And how you generate your revenues, again, whether you're for profit or nonprofit, you still got to have income coming in. And sometimes, and I've seen it, where organizations sometimes get a little comfortable thinking that the income that was coming in is just going to keep coming in the same way. And when it doesn't happen like that, we see a lot of those organizations fall apart, which then means that they can't fulfill their purpose. If you go out of business, not only the people that you're serving can't be helped, but you as an organization now can't be the helper anymore. So that has to be one of those areas that organizational leaders have to take a more of an innovative thought process to that, a more of a forward-thinking process and mindset as it relates to how are we going to become profitable. And again, and it may require multiple types of income, right? If you're a for-profit business, you may have to have multiple products or services that you sell. If you're a nonprofit entity, you may have to have multiple types of income streams, from donations to grants to contracts to services. You can be a nonprofit organization and still sell things. Just make sure you stay within the law of doing that, but you can generate revenues even by getting paid for your expertise or paid for the services that you offer. So there isn't just one way to become profitable. Again, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, or maybe even, again, a ministry or a community organization. This is where ingenuity is required. This is where resourcefulness is required. This is where innovation is required. But I also believe that this is also where we need to get God back involved in the innovation process, right? We need to get God back involved, right? He is the inventor of witty inventions. As Proverbs 8 tells us, he gives us the wisdom of witty inventions. Every good and perfect gift comes from the Father of lights, as we see in James. Isaiah 48:17, I will lead you in the way that will profit you, right? All these scriptures, so many, speak to God's ingenuity, his resourcefulness, his desire to have us prosper, his desire to have us to be profitable so we can be effective in the thing he called us to do. Again, his ultimate goal isn't that we would struggle to accomplish his purposes, right? Jesus said himself, He comes and he gives us life and that more abundantly. So we should be operating in an abundant manner, an abundant mindset from an abundant perspective as we execute the purpose and the plans that God has for us. And so I'm going to wrap it up here. I just want to share this thought with you as I continue to unpack how Purposenomics can be applied in business and in nonprofits and in large organizations and even in small organizations. There is a place for profits, a significant place if you want to have greater impact, greater influence, and accomplish your purpose in a more impactful way. So thank you for joining me. I look forward to you joining the next episode of Purposenomics. Make sure you subscribe, share, and like this episode, and I'll see you on the next one.
Across the U.S., Africa, and the global diaspora, small and medium-sized businesses are driving growth, creating jobs, and shaping communities. But too often, their potential is limited by unclear strategies, inefficient operations, and leaders struggling to adapt to rapid change. At Paul Wilson Global Solutions, we believe business success should never come at the expense of purpose. That's why we provide solutions that help organizations grow with clarity and create impact that lasts. We scale supply chains, equipping SMBs to compete for larger contracts and enter global markets. We build ecosystems, transforming incubators and hubs into engines of entrepreneurship and inclusive growth. We transform leaders, equipping entrepreneurs and executives to thrive with purpose and vision. From Atlanta to Kampala, Harare to Houston, we partner with changemakers to unlock opportunity, fuel sustainable growth, and multiply impact across generations. Paul Wilson Global Solutions. Building with purpose. Profit with impact.